The catalyst. The Geron Collective had ruled 17 star systems for 3 centuries. Their battleships moved through space like floating cities, armed with weapons that could crack planets. They had conquered 12 different species, and none had lasted more than a season against their military might. The Collective believed they understood everything about war, about power, and about which species deserved to survive. They were wrong about humans. Commander Vexthar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominance, watching the small research station through the viewing screen. It orbited a gas giant in what humans called the Kepler system, far from Earth, but still within territory the humans claimed. The station was unarmed, housing only scientists studying stellar phenomena. "This is Human Research Station Kepler 7 calling unknown vessel," came a transmission. "We are a civilian facility. Please state your intentions." Vexithar's second officer, Kraltek, looked to him for orders. "Commander, they pose no threat. Standard protocol is to issue warnings before action." "Standard protocol is for species that matter," Vexthar replied. His 4 eyes gleamed with contempt as he studied the primitive structure. "The Collective has decided this region belongs to us now. These humans are trespassing. Sir, there are 73 life signs aboard that station. Scientists, support staff, some families. Then they will serve as a message." Vexthar raised one clawed hand. "Fire." The Eternal Dominance unleashed a single plasma beam. The research station's shields lasted 3 seconds before collapsing. The beam cut through the hull like heated wire through wax. Atmosphere vented into space, carrying bodies and debris. Within 90 seconds, Kepler 7 ceased to exist. "Target destroyed," reported the weapons officer. Vexthar nodded with satisfaction. "Transmit our claim to the human homeworld. This territory now belongs to the Geron Collective. Any further human presence will be treated as hostile action." What Vexthar did not know was that one escape pod had launched in those final seconds. Inside, 3 survivors huddled together, watching their home and colleagues die. One of them was Captain Elena Morse, the station's security chief. As she watched the Geron ship jump to hyperspace, her face showed no tears, no panic. "Only cold calculation. Record everything," she told the others. "Every detail about that ship, its weapons, its trajectory. Earth needs to know exactly what we're dealing with." On Earth, the news arrived within hours. The United Earth Council convened immediately, their chambers filled with representatives from every nation and colony. High Chancellor Rebecca Santos stood at the podium, her dark eyes reflecting the footage playing on screens throughout the chamber. 70 lives, she said quietly. 70 unarmed civilians murdered without warning, without provocation, without mercy. "The Geron Collective is claiming that entire sector," reported Admiral Marcus Webb, commander of Earth's defense forces. "They're saying we have 1 week to evacuate all human presence or face military action." "How strong are they?" asked Councillor Yamamoto. "Extremely. Their technology is at least 50 years ahead of ours. They have hundreds of warships. Intelligence suggests they've never lost a war." The chamber erupted in worried discussion. Some voices called for evacuation, for negotiation, for appeasement. But Chancellor Santos raised her hand and silence fell. "I want to be clear about something," she said. "The Geron have made a fundamental miscalculation. They believe that because they are stronger, we will submit. They believe that because they have always won, they will win again." She paused. "They do not understand humans." "Chancellor," Councillor Petrov interjected, "surely we must consider the lives that would be lost in a war we cannot win." 70 lives were already lost. How many more will die if we teach the galaxy that humans can be murdered without consequence? Santos looked around the chamber. "I will not order anyone to fight, but I will also not order anyone to surrender. Each colony, each ship, each person will choose their own path. As for me, I choose to stand." The vote was not unanimous, but it was decisive. Earth would not evacuate. Earth would not submit. Captain Elena Morse recovered in a military hospital, but she refused to rest. Within 2 days, she was meeting with Admiral Webb and a team of tactical analysts. "Tell me everything you saw," Webb said. Elena pulled up holographic displays showing the Geron ship. "They're powerful, but I noticed something. Their ship moved in perfectly straight lines. Their attack was textbook perfect. No improvisation, no creativity. Meaning they fight by formulas. They've won so many times that they've stopped thinking. They calculate the odds, apply overwhelming force, and victory follows." Eleanor's eyes hardened. "That's not how humans fight." "How do humans fight?" asked Lieutenant Commander Sarah Park, one of Webb's strategic officers. Elena smiled grimly. "However, we have to." Over the following days, Earth mobilized, but not in the way the Zeran expected. Instead of massing fleets and fortifying colonies, humanity dispersed. Naval vessels scattered throughout human space. Marines and equipment were quietly moved to hidden locations. Civilian ships were armed with whatever weapons could be installed. "They'll think we're panicking," Webb explained to his staff. "They'll see chaos and disorganization. But what we're actually doing is becoming impossible to find and impossible to kill all at once." When the Zeran deadline passed, Commander Vexthar led a fleet of 200 warships into human space. He expected to find a defensive line, a last desperate stand. Instead, he found empty space. "Where are they?" he demanded. "Unclear, Commander," Kraltek replied. "Human colonies show minimal activity. Their fleet seems to have scattered. They're running, like all the others." Vexthar felt satisfaction. "Begin occupation operations. Take their colonies and resource stations. When they see we control everything they need, they'll surrender." The first Zeran occupation force landed on Titan, Saturn's largest moon. The colony there had 18,000 inhabitants, mostly miners and engineers. The Zeran soldiers expected terrified civilians. Instead, they found the colony apparently abandoned. "Spread out," ordered Force Leader Tekvar. "Search every building." The ambush came from everywhere at once. What the Zeran thought were abandoned buildings erupted with weapons fire. Mining charges meant for breaking apart asteroids exploded beneath their vehicles. Heavy machinery, controlled remotely, crashed into their formations. Within an hour, the Zeran force was in full retreat back to their ships, having lost 40 soldiers to an enemy they never even saw clearly. Similar attacks happened across human space. On Mars, Zeran troops found themselves fighting in an endless maze of tunnels, never knowing where the next attack would come from. Near Jupiter, a Zeran convoy was destroyed by what appeared to be civilian cargo ships that had been secretly armed with military weapons. Commander Vexthar received the reports with growing confusion. This is not how conquered species behave. Where are their surrender offers? Where are their pleas for mercy? "Commander," Kraltek said carefully, "perhaps we should reconsider our approach. These humans are not acting rationally. There is no such thing as irrational behavior in war. There are only winners and losers." But even as Vexthar said this, doubt crept into his mind. On Earth, Captain Elena Morse had been given command of a special operations unit. Her mission was simple: make the Zeran pay for every inch of space they claimed. "Remember," she told her team as they prepared for their first raid, "we're not trying to win fair fights. We're trying to make them scared to take unfair ones." Her unit struck at a Zeran supply depot in the asteroid belt. They used tactics no military academy taught, hitting fast then disappearing before reinforcements arrived. They destroyed supplies the Zeran needed, then vanished into the darkness between worlds. Other human units copied these tactics. The Zeran found that occupying human territory was like trying to hold water in their claws. The more force they applied, the more their enemies slipped through their fingers. On the Zeran homeworld, the Collective Council met to discuss the unexpected resistance. "The humans have lost every major engagement," reported the Supreme Strategist. "By all calculations, they should surrender within weeks." "Then why do our forces continue to take casualties?" demanded Council Leader Zorax. "Why does every colony require 10 times the troops we projected?" "The humans fight without logic. They sacrifice tactical advantages for no apparent gain. They continue resistance in situations where victory is mathematically impossible." Zorax studied the battle reports with his multiple eyes. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "we are measuring the wrong variable. We calculate victory through loss ratios and territorial control. But what if humans calculate victory differently? How else could victory be measured?" "I do not know." "And that," Zorax said grimly, "is the problem." Back in human space, Admiral Webb gathered his commanders for a strategic briefing. Captain Morse attended via holographic link from her ship. "The good news," Webb began, "is that we're exceeding projections. The Zeran expected to control all human space within a month. It's been 6 weeks and they still haven't secured a single major colony." "The bad news?" asked Morse. "The bad news is we're bleeding. We're losing people every day. Our resources are dwindling. At this rate, we can hold out maybe 3 more months before we simply run out of everything." The room fell silent. Then Morse spoke. "Admiral, permission to speak freely." "Granted. 3 months is an eternity in war. A lot can happen. And besides," she smiled coldly, "the Zeren are bleeding too. The question is, who's willing to bleed longer?" Lieutenant Commander Park raised her hand. "Sir, intelligence has identified a pattern in Zeren logistics. They're running supplies to their forward bases from a central hub in the Ross 128 system." Webb studied the star chart. "That's deep in their territory. Any attack would be a one-way trip." "Not if we move fast enough," Morse said. "Hit the hub, cripple their supply chain, get out before they can respond." "It's suicide," someone objected. "It's war," Morse replied. "And in war, humans don't calculate odds. We calculate determination." The mission received approval. Captain Elena Morse would lead a strike force of 30 ships, all volunteers, into the heart of Zeren space. Their target was the supply hub that sustained the entire occupation force. As her ship prepared to jump to hyperspace, Morse recorded a message to be broadcast throughout human space. "To everyone watching, we're going to hurt them where they think they're safe. We're going to show them that nowhere is beyond our reach." The Zeren thought humans would break easily. They're learning otherwise. Remember Kepler 7, remember why we fight. And never ever give up. The message ended, but its impact rippled through both human and Zeren forces. Among humans, morale surged. Among the Zeren, for the first time in 3 centuries, soldiers began to feel something unfamiliar. Fear. The awakening Captain Elena Morse's strike force dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Ross 128 system. Before them hung the Zeren supply hub, a massive orbital station that coordinated logistics for the entire occupation of human space. It was protected by defensive platforms, patrol ships, and layers of sensor arrays. "Scan complete," reported Lieutenant Jacobs. "Defenses are heavy but focused outward. They're not expecting an attack this deep in their territory." "Of course they're not," Morse replied. "That's why we're here." "Weapons, are the packages ready?" "All 30 ships are loaded and armed, Captain." Morse took a breath. This would either be remembered as humanity's boldest strike or its most foolish sacrifice. "All ships begin approach. Remember, we're not here to destroy everything. We're here to cripple their logistics and prove nowhere is safe." The human ships accelerated toward the station, moving in an erratic pattern that confused Zeren targeting computers. When the defensive platforms finally opened fire, the human vessels scattered like startled birds, each one following a different approach vector. On the station, Commander Threshkal watched the attack unfold with disbelief. "How did humans penetrate this deep into collective space?" "Unknown, sir. They must have used civilian transponders or stolen identification codes. It does not matter. Activate all defenses. These ships will not escape." But Morse had no intention of engaging in a prolonged battle. Her ships darted past the defensive fire, each one releasing a cargo pod before peeling away. The pods, moving too fast for point defenses to track, slammed into the station's docking bays and fuel depots. The explosions that followed were carefully calculated. Not large enough to destroy the station completely, but devastating enough to cripple its operations for months. Fuel reserves erupted in chains of fire. Supply warehouses vented their contents into space. Critical communication arrays went dark. "All ships withdraw," Morse commanded. Her fleet jumped back into hyperspace before Zeren reinforcements could arrive, leaving behind chaos and destruction. The effect was immediate. Across human space, Zeren occupation forces suddenly found their supply lines cut. Food shipments stopped arriving. Ammunition reserves dwindled. Fuel for their ships became scarce. Units that had been aggressively pushing forward suddenly had to consolidate and ration resources. Commander Vexthar received the news aboard the Eternal Dominance with barely contained rage. How is this possible? How did humans strike at Ross 128? "They're not fighting like we expected, Commander," Kraltek said carefully. "They're not trying to win battles. They're trying to make occupation impossible. Then we will show them the price of defiance. Prepare for a full assault on Earth itself. We will force them to commit their remaining forces to defend their homeworld, and there we will crush them decisively." But as Vexthar's fleet prepared for the assault, something unexpected began happening among his crews. Soldiers who had served for decades started requesting transfers. Others developed mysterious illnesses. Some simply refused to board ships bound for human space. The Zeren military, which had never experienced widespread desertion, was now seeing its forces demoralized by an enemy they still technically outnumbered and outgunned. On Earth, Dr. James Chen worked in a laboratory buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. As humanity's leading xenobiologist, he had been studying captured Zeren equipment and biological samples, searching for any weakness that could be exploited. What he discovered would change everything. General Webb, he called over the secure channel, his voice trembling with excitement. "I need you to see this immediately." Webb arrived within the hour, accompanied by his chief medical officer. Chen pulled up holographic displays, showing Zeren genetic and neurological data. "I've been analyzing how the Zeren think, how they make decisions," Chen explained, "and I found something remarkable. Their brains are structured completely differently from ours." "In what way?" "The Zeren process everything through pure logic and efficiency calculations. Their neural pathways literally cannot comprehend the concept of fighting for abstract principles. To them, continuing a battle that you're mathematically likely to lose makes no sense at all." Webb stared at the data. "So when we keep fighting despite being outgunned, it's not just unexpected to them, it's literally incomprehensible. Their brains can't model or predict behavior that doesn't follow cost-benefit analysis. Every time we sacrifice resources for morale or symbolism, we're doing something their minds cannot process. That explains why their tactics keep failing," Webb said slowly. "They're trying to fight an enemy whose actions don't make sense to their way of thinking." "There's more," Chen continued. "I've found a biological vulnerability. The Zeren have a heightened sensitivity to certain electromagnetic frequencies. I think we can develop weapons that would be devastating to them, but relatively harmless to humans." "How long would it take to weaponize this?" "If we prioritize it, 3 weeks, maybe less." Webb made an immediate decision. "You have unlimited resources and authority. Whatever you need, you get it. If this works, we might actually have a chance." While Chen worked on his breakthrough, the ground war continued to evolve. On Mars, Lieutenant Commander Jin Park led a resistance cell that had perfected the art of making occupation unbearable. "The Zeren follow schedules," she explained to her team. "They rotate patrols every 6 hours, supply convoys every 3 days. They think predictability means security. But predictability means vulnerability," finished Corporal Hassan. "Exactly. We know where they'll be and when. So we make every scheduled event a potential disaster." Jin's cell began a campaign of perfectly timed disruptions. Zeren patrols found their routes blocked by accidental construction. Supply convoys discovered that bridges had mysteriously weakened just before they needed to cross. Command posts lost power at the exact moment important briefings were scheduled. None of these actions were overtly violent, but their cumulative effect was devastating to Zeren efficiency. Commanders who had conquered entire planets found themselves unable to maintain basic operations on a single human colony. Elsewhere in human space, civilian resistance networks were proving equally effective. Engineer Maria Santos had organized refugees from captured colonies into a vast intelligence network. "We have eyes everywhere," she told Admiral Webb during a briefing. "Every Zeren base has humans working under occupation. Janitors, cooks, maintenance workers. They're invisible to the Zeren, but they see everything and report everything. What are they learning? That Zeren soldiers are terrified. They don't understand why humans won't surrender. They think we're insane or suicidal. Some of them are having what we'd call nervous breakdowns." This intelligence confirmed what Chen had theorized. The Zeren weren't just losing militarily. They were losing psychologically to an enemy whose behavior they couldn't comprehend. The breaking point came during the Battle of Luna. Commander Vexthar had assembled his largest fleet yet for a direct assault on Earth's moon, intending to establish a permanent base from which to bombard the human homeworld into submission. The battle began as the Zeren expected. Their superior numbers and firepower pushed back human defensive forces. Victory seemed certain. Then Dr. Chen's weapons arrived. The new munitions released electromagnetic pulses tuned precisely to Zeren neural frequencies. To human forces, they caused minor discomfort. To Zeren crews, they were agonizing, disrupting their thought processes and motor control. Zeren ships began to drift out of formation. Weapons fired erratically. Communications became garbled. The carefully coordinated assault dissolved into confusion and panic. "What is happening?" Vexthar demanded. But even his own thoughts felt sluggish and painful. Captain Morse, commanding the human defense fleet, saw her opportunity. "All ships press the attack." They're vulnerable. The human fleet, smaller and less advanced, suddenly had the advantage of crews who could think clearly. They struck at the disoriented Zeran formation with devastating precision. When the electromagnetic weapons finally powered down, the Zeran fleet was shattered. Vexthar's flagship was crippled. Half his ships were destroyed or disabled. The survivors retreated in disorder, the first time in collective history that a Zeran fleet had been routed in open battle. On Earth, celebrations erupted. But Admiral Webb knew better than to think the war was over. "This victory will make them more desperate, not less," he warned. "The Zeran have never faced real defeat before. How they respond to this will determine everything." He was right to be concerned. On the Zeran homeworld, the Collective Council met in emergency session. Council leader Jorax addressed the assembly with his 4 eyes blazing. "The humans have done the impossible. They have defeated our fleet, not through superior technology, but through weapons we did not know existed and tactics we cannot predict." He paused. "The question before us is simple. Do we escalate to total war, or do we reconsider our entire approach? We must crush them completely," demanded war leader Crescital. "Our entire empire's reputation depends on it. If humans can resist successfully, every species we've conquered will rebel." "Perhaps," said science leader Vreneth quietly, "that is exactly what we should fear. Not human military capability, but human determination. Our calculations showed they would surrender in weeks. Our calculations were wrong. What else are we wrong about?" The debate raged for hours. Finally, Zorax made a decision that would shock the entire collective. "We will commit our full military strength to one final campaign against humanity. But this time we will attempt to understand our enemy before we fight them. We will study human psychology, human history, human culture, and we will adapt our tactics accordingly." It was the first time in 300 years that the Zeran collective had admitted they might need to learn from their enemies. Back in human space, Captain Elena Morse received new orders: lead a delegation to neutral territory where representatives from other alien species wished to meet. Species that the Zeran had conquered decades or centuries ago. "They want to know how we're doing it," explained Ambassador Huang, who would accompany her. "How we're resisting when everyone else surrendered." The meeting took place on an independent trading station. Representatives from 6 different species waited, their expressions ranging from curious to desperate. "You're losing the war," they observed the delegate from the Curvan people, a species conquered 80 years prior. "Your casualties are unsustainable. Your resources are depleting. How is this better than surrender?" Morse looked at each representative in turn. "Because we're still fighting. Because our children are growing up knowing that humans don't bow to tyrants. Because we've proven that the Zeran can bleed." She leaned forward. "You all surrendered to save yourselves. I understand that. But what did you save? Lives that must live under occupation? Worlds that belong to others? We chose a different path." "But you're dying," another delegate protested. "Everyone dies eventually," Morse replied. "The question is whether you die free or live as a slave." The meeting continued for hours. By the end, something had changed in those representatives' eyes. They began asking different questions. Not how do we avoid destruction, but how do we fight back? Seeds of rebellion, planted by human resistance, were beginning to sprout across the Zeran Empire. The war was about to expand far beyond human space. The reckoning. The Zeran collective had never mobilized its full military strength against a single enemy. For 3 centuries, partial deployments had been sufficient to conquer and occupy dozens of worlds. But humanity's continued resistance demanded something unprecedented. Council leader Jorax stood before the assembled collective fleet, the largest armada in their history. Over 3,000 warships filled the orbital space around the Zeran homeworld, representing every military asset the Empire possessed. "This ends now," Jorax declared. "We will commit everything to breaking human resistance. Not because we need this much force, but because the galaxy must see that defying the collective leads only to total defeat." Commander Vexthar, despite his recent failures, remained in command of the assault force. He had spent weeks studying human tactics, psychology, and history. What he learned disturbed him deeply. Humans have a concept they call Pyrrhic victory, he explained to his senior officers. It means winning a battle, but losing so much that the victory is meaningless. I believe humans are deliberately pursuing this strategy. They will make conquering them so expensive that we abandon the effort. Then we must prove we will pay any price, replied war leader Kreshtal, who had come personally to oversee the campaign. To demonstrate absolute commitment, as the Geran fleet prepared for its final assault, humanity also gathered its strength. But human preparations looked different from what the Geran expected. Admiral Webb had authorized a strategy so desperate that many called it insane. Voluntary civilian evacuation to hidden colony ships, while simultaneously arming every remaining human with whatever weapons could be manufactured. We're betting everything on two things, Webb explained to his command staff. First, that we can make occupation so costly that even total military victory won't matter to the Geran. Second, that Dr. Chen's research will give us enough of an edge to survive the initial assault. Captain Elena Morse had been promoted to Commodore and given command of humanity's largest remaining battle group. She knew the mathematics were impossibly against them, but mathematics had been against them from the beginning. The Geran still don't understand us, she told her assembled captains. They think wars are won by destroying fleets and capturing territory. But wars are won by breaking the enemy's will to fight. And humans, she smiled coldly. Humans are very good at breaking things. The invasion fleet entered human space in a formation so vast it took hours to complete the hyperspace jump. Commander Vexthar expected to find human forces massed for a final desperate defense. Instead, he found something that made his blood run cold. The human fleet was scattered across dozens of positions, each one carefully placed to create overlapping fields of fire, using Dr. Chen's electromagnetic weapons, rather than meeting the Geran in one decisive battle. The humans had created a killing zone that would bleed the invasion force across hundreds of engagements. They're not trying to win, Kraltek observed. They're trying to make us lose. Then we will not give them time to execute this strategy, Vexthar decided. All ships maximum speed. We will punch through their defenses before they can coordinate. But as the Geran fleet accelerated forward, something unexpected happened. Ships from other species began emerging from hyperspace throughout human territory. The Curvens sent their remaining fleet. The Margos people contributed converted cargo vessels. Even species that had been conquered a century ago sent whatever forces they could spare. Sir, Kraltek reported with alarm. We're detecting over 800 non-human vessels entering the battle space. They're positioning themselves alongside human forces. Vexthar felt something he had never experienced in decades of military service. Genuine fear. The humans hadn't just resisted. They had inspired half the conquered galaxy to rebel. On Earth, Ambassador Huang received real-time updates from the forming coalition. It's working, she breathed. Species we thought were broken are sending help. The Geran taught them submission, said Chancellor Santos, who had remained on Earth despite evacuation orders. But humans taught them that resistance is possible. Now we'll see what happens when an empire faces everyone it ever conquered. The Battle of Sol System began when Commodore Morse gave the order to engage. Human ships, supported by their newfound allies, struck at the Geran fleet using tactics that defied all military logic. Small human vessels deliberately rammed larger Geran ships, their crews evacuating at the last second. Mining ships used industrial lasers to cut through military armor. Civilian transports rigged with explosives were piloted by volunteers into Geran formations. Dr. Chen's electromagnetic weapons created zones of disruption where Geran crews couldn't think clearly, couldn't coordinate, couldn't fight effectively. In those zones, even inferior human and allied ships could achieve victory through superior determination. They're everywhere. Vexthar shouted as his fleet formation began to dissolve. How can we fight an enemy that doesn't fear death? Because death is not what they fear most, Kraltek replied quietly. They fear living without freedom more than dying for it. The battle raged for 3 days across the Sol system. Neither side would retreat. The Geran couldn't, because their entire empire's credibility depended on victory. Humans couldn't because this was literally their last stand. On the third day, Dr. Chen activated his ultimate weapon, a modified version of the electromagnetic pulse that didn't just disrupt Geran thinking, but caused actual physical pain to their neural systems. It was a weapon of last resort, something humans had hesitated to use because of its cruelty. "We're not like them," Chen had argued during the weapons debate. "We don't torture enemies." "Then we'll lose," Morse had replied grimly. "And when we lose, the Zeren will enslave every human in the galaxy. Is that better?" Now as Chen activated the weapon, Zeren ships across the battle space went dark. Crews collapsed in agony. The mighty invasion fleet, unstoppable by conventional means, was brought to its knees by pain. Commander Vexthar, experiencing agony he couldn't comprehend, gave an order he never thought he would utter. "All ships, retreat, withdraw from human space." But war leader Kreshtal, aboard a command ship equipped with better shielding, overrode the order. "There is no retreat. We will prevail or die." It was the worst decision the Zeren Collective ever made. With their retreat blocked and their fleet crippled by Chen's weapon, Zeren forces began surrendering en masse. Ship after ship broadcast capitulation signals. Soldiers who had never known defeat were begging to be taken prisoner rather than endure more pain. Kreshtal's flagship, the Supreme Dominance, was boarded by a joint human-alien assault force. Commodore Morse led the boarding action personally, her Marines fighting alongside Curvan warriors and Margot's defenders. When they breached the command deck, Kreshtal stood alone, his weapons ready for a final battle. Morse raised her hand, stopping her troops from firing. "It's over," she said simply. "The Collective does not surrender," Kreshtal hissed. "The Collective just did. Your entire fleet is either destroyed or captured. Your soldiers are surrendering by the thousands. You've lost. We cannot lose. We are stronger. We are superior." Morse lowered her weapon. "That's what every empire believes before it falls. You were stronger, yes, but we were willing to pay a higher price. In the end, that's what matters." As Kreshtal was taken into custody, something remarkable was happening throughout the Zeren Empire. News of the defeat spread faster than official communications could suppress it. Species that had been conquered decades ago began uprising. Zeren occupation forces, demoralized and confused, either retreated or joined the rebels. The mighty Zeren Collective, which had ruled 17 star systems for 3 centuries, collapsed in less than 3 weeks. On the Zeren homeworld, Council leader Jorax watched the Empire crumble with a mixture of horror and fascination. He requested a meeting with human representatives, and to everyone's surprise they agreed. The meeting took place on a neutral station. Jorax faced Commodore Morse, Admiral Webb, and Ambassador Huang across a simple table. "We need to understand," Jorax said without preamble. "We studied your species. You were not the strongest, not the most advanced, not the most numerous. By every calculation, you should have surrendered within weeks. Yet you destroyed our empire. How?" Morse considered her answer carefully. "You calculated odds. We calculated necessity. You thought about winning efficiently. We thought about not losing at all. You fought a war. We fought for survival, but you were dying. Your casualties were unsustainable." "Yes," Morse agreed, "but we were dying free. And apparently that matters more than you can understand." Jorax was silent for a long moment. "Our species evolved on a world where resources were scarce and competition intense. We learned to calculate every decision, to never fight battles we couldn't win. It made us efficient, powerful." He looked at each human in turn. "But it also made us unable to understand species who calculate differently. What happens now?" Webb asked. "Now we learn. The Collective as you knew it is gone. The species we conquered are free or soon will be. We must find a new way to exist in the galaxy." Jorax's 4 eyes focused on Morse. "Perhaps you could teach us how to fight for principles instead of profit." "Maybe," Morse replied. "But first, you need to understand why principles matter." The war officially ended 6 months after the Battle of Sol system. The peace treaty was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. The Zeren didn't just surrender. They fundamentally restructured their entire society, trying to understand the concepts of freedom and self-determination that had defeated them. Dr. James Chen received the newly created Medal of Humanity for his research that had provided the decisive edge in the final battle. During his acceptance speech, he said something that would be remembered for generations. "We won this war not because we were stronger, but because we were willing to be weaker for the right reasons." The Zeren couldn't understand why we kept fighting when we were losing. The answer is simple. We weren't measuring victory the same way they were. Captain Elena Morse, promoted to admiral, was given command of the joint human-alien defense fleet that would patrol the formerly occupied territories. During her first address to the mixed crews, she told them, "The Jaren came to human space expecting an easy conquest. They destroyed Kepler-7 and murdered 70 innocent people. They thought that act of violence would break us. Instead, it taught us that some things are worth dying for. And once you know that, nothing can make you surrender." The phrase, "How could someone remain after messing with humans?" became a galactic proverb, but its meaning evolved. It no longer just meant that humans destroyed their enemies. It meant that confronting humanity changed you fundamentally. The Jaren had tried to conquer humans and lost their empire. But in losing, they gained something they never had before: understanding. 5 years after the war, the first Jaren delegation visited Earth peacefully. Commander Vexthar, now retired from military service, walked through a memorial garden dedicated to the 70 victims of Kepler-7. He stood before the monument for a long time, trying to comprehend the concept of dying for others. Ambassador Huang found him there. "Do you understand now?" she asked gently. "I am beginning to," Vexthar replied. "My people thought strength was measured in ships and weapons, but humans showed us that true strength is measured in what you're willing to sacrifice for what you believe in. It's a hard lesson. Yes, but necessary." He turned to face her. "The galaxy is better for learning it." "Even if the cost was considerable," Huang nodded. "War always costs more than anyone wants to pay. The question is whether what you gain is worth what you lose." "And was it?" "Worth it, I mean. 70 people died on Kepler-7. Millions more died in the war that followed. But because of that sacrifice, billions are now free who would have lived as slaves." She looked at the memorial. "Yes, it was worth it. It had to be." As the sun set over Earth, casting long shadows across the memorial garden, Vexthar understood something profound. Humans hadn't just won a war. They had proven that determination, courage, and the willingness to sacrifice could triumph over any technological advantage. They had changed the fundamental equation that governed galactic power. The memorial service, held each year on the anniversary of Kepler-7's destruction, became a gathering point for species from across the galaxy. Former Jaren soldiers stood alongside human veterans. Representatives from newly liberated worlds laid flowers beside the names of people they never knew, but whose sacrifice had freed them. Admiral Elena Morse attended every year without fail. Now in her 50s, with grey streaking through her hair, she had become the face of human resilience throughout the galaxy. But she never forgot where it all started. 70 people, she would say to the assembled crowd each year. 70 scientists, engineers, support staff, and families. They went to space to study stars, to push the boundaries of knowledge, to build a better future. They died because someone decided their lives didn't matter. She would pause, looking at the diverse crowd of humans and aliens gathered before her. But their deaths mattered. Those 70 lives sparked a fire that burned across the galaxy. They reminded us all that freedom isn't free, that tyranny must be resisted, that some prices are worth paying. In the decade following the war, the galaxy transformed. The collapse of the Jaren Collective created a power vacuum. But instead of another empire rising to fill it, something unprecedented occurred. A confederation of equal partners formed. The Galactic Coalition for Free Worlds included humans, former Jaren subjects, and even reformed Jaren themselves. It was built on principles the galaxy had never seen before: voluntary membership, mutual defense, and the fundamental right of every species to self-determination. Dr. James Chen, now leading the Coalition's Scientific Council, worked alongside Jaren scientists who had once developed weapons to conquer his people. The collaboration produced breakthroughs neither species could have achieved alone. "It's strange," Chen remarked during one research session with Vreneth, the former Jaren science leader. "We spent years trying to kill each other. Now we're trying to cure diseases together." "Not so strange," Vreneth replied, his translator rendering his multiple clicking sounds into human language. "War revealed our fundamental misunderstanding of each other. Peace allows us to correct that misunderstanding. Both are necessary for progress." "Do you think the war was necessary then?" Vreneth was silent for a moment. "Necessary? No, inevitable, perhaps. The Zeran Collective had grown so confident in its superiority that only total defeat could shatter that confidence. Humans provided that defeat. Was it necessary? I hope not. But was it the only way we would learn? Possibly. Back on Earth, the city of New Kepler had been built on the exact coordinates where the destroyed research station once orbited the gas giant. It served as both a memorial and a research facility, continuing the work that had been interrupted by violence a decade earlier. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Park, who had served under Admiral Morse during the war, now directed the station. She often gave tours to young students, telling them about the war and what had been learned from it. The Zeran thought they understood warfare, she would explain. They had centuries of experience, perfect tactics, overwhelming force. What they didn't understand was that humans don't fight wars to win battles. We fight wars to protect what we love. But we did win battles, a young student once pointed out. We won the Battle of Sol System. We survived the Battle of Sol System, Park corrected gently. That's different from winning. The Zeran won most of the battles. They captured most of our territory. They destroyed most of our fleet. By every military measure, they were winning the war. Then how did we win? Because we never gave up. Because we made victory too expensive for them to afford. Because we inspired others to resist. That's not winning battles. That's winning wars, Commander Vexthar, who had become an unlikely peace advocate among his people, often visited human worlds to speak about the transformation the war had caused in Zeran society. My people measured everything by efficiency, he told audiences. We calculated the cost of every action, the benefit of every conquest. When humans refused to surrender despite impossible odds, it broke our calculations. We had no formula for dealing with an enemy who valued principles over survival. During one visit to Earth, he met with a group of Kepler-7 survivors, including the 3 who had escaped in the final moments. The meeting was awkward and painful, but necessary. I gave the order to fire on your station, Vexthar told them, his 4 eyes unable to meet their gaze. I believed your lives were acceptable losses in establishing territorial claims. I was wrong. Not just strategically wrong, but morally wrong. And I have spent every day since trying to understand why. Captain Eleanor Morse, who had been one of those survivors, studied him carefully. Have you figured it out? I think so. We Zeran evolved to see individuals as components in a larger system. Sacrificing components for systematic efficiency made sense to us. We didn't understand that to humans every individual is irreplaceable. That's close, Morse said, but not quite complete. It's not that every individual is irreplaceable. It's that every individual has the right to choose what they're willing to sacrifice for. You took that choice from the 70 people on Kepler-7. That's why it was wrong. The conversation continued for hours, and by the end, something had changed. The survivors didn't forgive Vexthar, some wounds cut too deep for forgiveness, but they understood him. And he understood them. That understanding, more than any treaty, ensured the peace would last. 20 years after the war, the last Zeran occupation force withdrew from the last formerly occupied world. The empire that had controlled 17 star systems was now a single system, seeking to rebuild its society from the ground up. The transformation wasn't easy. Zeran, who had spent their lives believing in their superiority, struggled to accept equality with species they had once conquered. Some never accepted it and retreated into isolated communities. But slowly a new generation of Zeran emerged, one that had grown up learning human concepts like individual rights, sacrifice for principles, and the value of diversity. Admiral Morse, now retired, was invited to give the commencement speech at the Zeran Military Academy, which had been completely restructured based on lessons learned from the war. Your ancestors came to human space expecting an easy conquest, she told the graduating cadets, a mix of Zeran and students from dozens of other species. They had every advantage, superior numbers, better technology, centuries of experience. They should have won in weeks. She paused, looking at the young faces before her. But they miscalculated one fundamental variable, how much humans were willing to sacrifice for freedom. Not because we wanted to die, but because we believed some things were more important than survival. That belief, that willingness to pay any price for our principles, was something your ancestors' calculations couldn't account for. The lesson isn't that determination always beats technology, or that sacrifice always wins wars. The lesson is that there are things in this universe more powerful than weapons or ships or tactical superiority. Belief in a cause, love for your people, the simple refusal to give up. You're here today because your society learned that lesson the hard way. You're here because an empire fell and from its ashes rose something better. You're here because humans refused to let 70 murdered civilians die in vain. She smiled at them, her expression both sad and hopeful. Don't waste it. The graduates, human and alien alike, stood and applauded, not because they were required to, but because they understood. The galaxy had been forever changed by what humans called the refusal, the moment when humanity decided that some things were worth dying for, and in making that decision, proved they were worth living with. As Morse left the academy, she looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, new species were encountering each other, forming alliances, occasionally fighting wars. But now they all knew the lesson humanity had taught at such terrible cost. No empire, no matter how powerful, can survive against people who refuse to be conquered. No military advantage, no matter how overwhelming, can defeat determination. And no one, absolutely no one, survives unchanged after angering humans, because humans don't just fight to win. They fight to make sure everyone remembers what happens when you threaten what they love. The war was over. The galaxy was at peace, but the memory of humanity's refusal to surrender would echo through the stars for generations to come, a warning and an inspiration to every species that would ever face tyranny. Some battles are worth fighting even when you cannot win. Some sacrifices are worth making, even when the cost is everything. And some species, when pushed far enough, will teach the galaxy that strength isn't measured in ships or weapons, but in the simple, stubborn refusal to give up. Humanity had taught that lesson in blood and fire. The galaxy would never forget it. If this story gave you chills, hit that subscribe button and join the legion of humanity's finest. Smash like to show the galaxy we never back down. And tell me in the comments, what would you do if aliens dared to anger humanity? Stay human, stay unstoppable.